In the 1950s, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE were nowhere as wealthy as they are today. Many regions were desert with limited industries, limited infrastructure, and limited global influence. Then everything changed. Oil was discovered, and within a few decades, oil transferred these countries into one of the richest economies in the world. Today, another resource is becoming as important as oil. But unlike oil, it cannot be extracted from the ground. It is manufactured inside highly advanced factories costing billions of dollars. And this resource powers almost every modern device you use. Your phone, your laptop, your car, artificial intelligence, missiles, satellites, everything. That resource is semiconductors. Today, India is spending billions of dollars trying to build this industry. But can semiconductors do for India what oil did for Middle East? Can they create millions of jobs? Can they boost exports? Can they make India a manufacturing superpower? Or are we arriving late to this game? To answer that, we first need to understand how oil transformed an entire region. Before oil, much of the Gulf region looked very different. The economies of countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE were largely dependent on fishing, pearl diving, trade, and small local business. Life was difficult, infrastructure was limited, economic opportunities were limited. Then came oil. Suddenly, these countries possessed something the entire industry world desperately needed: energy. And as global demand for oil exploded, where every other country was placing order for oil, money started to flow into these nations. Their government invested in roads, airports, ports, schools, hospitals, and modern cities. Oil revenues funded massive development projects. Foreign companies invested billions. Millions of workers arrived from around the world, and gradually these countries became some of the most influential economies in the world. In simple words, oil became an economic engine. The more the world needed this oil, the more valuable these countries became globally. But here is the interesting part. The 21st century is creating a new type of resource. A resource that powers the digital economy, and that resource is semiconductor. But why semiconductors are called the oil? You wake up, check your smartphone, you use the internet, make digital payment, you drive a car, you use a laptop, you interact with AI. Every single one of those things depend on semiconductor chips. Semiconductors are tiny electronic components that act as the brain of modern technology. Without them, phone, computer, AI, cars, military systems, everything stops working. In fact, if you remember, after COVID, there was global chip shortage, because of which many automobile factories around the world were forced to slow production because they couldn't simply get enough chips. A tiny component smaller than your fingernail was powerful enough to disrupt billion-dollar industries. This is why many experts call semiconductors the oil of the digital age, because just like oil powered the industrial revolution, semiconductors powered the digital revolution, and whoever controls this gains enormous strategic and economic advantage. Now let's look at a country that already achieved something extraordinary through semiconductors. Taiwan. Taiwan is not rich in oil. It is not rich in natural resource. It is relatively small in size. Yet Taiwan is one of the most important economies in the world. Why? Because of one company, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC manufactured many of the world's most advanced chips. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm depends heavily on chips produced in Taiwan. Some of the biggest technology companies on earth relies on factories located on small island, and because of this, Taiwan became globally important. Its semiconductor industry created jobs, export to other countries, technological expertise, international influence. Taiwan proved something powerful. You don't need oil to become strategically important. If you control advanced technology, the world becomes dependent on you anyway. And this is exactly what India hopes to achieve. But why India missed the chip revolution? Now here's the uncomfortable question. If semiconductors are so important, why India isn't already a semiconductor giant? The answer lies in history. For decades, India heavily focused on software and services. And to be fair, this strategy worked. India became a global IT powerhouse. Companies around the world relied on Indian software talent. Millions of jobs were created. Exports increased. But while India was becoming strong in software, countries like Taiwan, South Korea, and later China were building manufacturing ecosystem. They invested in factories, supply chains, industrial cluster, semiconductor infrastructure. And semiconductor manufacturing is not something that you can build overnight. It requires decades of investment, learning, ecosystem development. While India was writing software, others were learning how to manufacture chips, and this created a huge gap. So why is India investing billions now? Today India wants to close that gap, and the timing is not random. Several global events changed everything. First, the COVID supply chain crisis showed how dangerous it is to only depend on few countries for critical components. Second, tensions between China and West increased. Third, the rise of AI created massive demand of advanced chips. Suddenly around the world, the government realized semiconductor security is national security. That means they need massive supply of chips, and they cannot depend on single country. And here India saw an opportunity. The government launched semiconductor incentive program. Companies like Tata Motor, Micron, CG Power announced major investment. Billions of dollars are now being committed. The goal is simple: build a domestic semiconductor ecosystem before demand explodes even further. There is one major difference between oil and semiconductors. Oil can be discovered, but semiconductors, it must be built. And building them is incredibly difficult. A semiconductor factory requires billions of dollars. A modern fab where these chips are made can cost 10, 20 or even $30 billion. Then comes highly skilled engineers, ultra pure chemicals, stable electricity, massive water supplies, advanced machinery. Every tiny dust particles can ruin chip production. That's why semiconductor factories are among the most sophisticated manufacturing facilities ever created, and even after spending billions, success is not guaranteed. This is why only a handful of countries that dominate this industry today. Building a semiconductor ecosystem is one of the hardest industrial challenge any country can undertake. But what happens if India succeeds? Not partially, finally succeeds. What could happen? First, export could increase drastically. Second, millions of high-paying jobs could be created. Third, India can reduce dependency on imported chips. Fourth, industries like AI, defense, electronics, automobiles could become stronger. And perhaps most importantly, India could become a critical part of global technology supply chains. The same way world once dependent on Middle Eastern oil, future industries may increasingly dependent on countries that manufacture advanced semiconductors. That would give India economic power, technological influence, and strategic importance. So can semiconductors do for India what oil did for the Middle East? Yes, because semiconductors can create jobs, exports, investments, economic growth, global influence. But unlike oil, semiconductors are not a natural gift. They are an industrial achievement. Countries must earn their position through innovation, engineering, manufacturing, and long-term planning. And that makes the challenge much more harder. But it also makes the reward much more bigger. Because oil eventually runs out. Knowledge doesn't. Technology doesn't. Industrial ecosystem doesn't disappear overnight. The Middle East became wealthy because the world needed its oil. Taiwan became important because the world needed its chips. Now India is trying to build an industry that could determine its next phase of economic growth. Will it be easy? No. Will it take years? Absolutely. But if India succeeds, semiconductors may become far more than just another manufacturing sector. They could become one of the foundations of India's future economy. Because in the 21st century, the most valuable resource may no longer be buried underground. It may be manufactured inside a semiconductor factory. The question is not whether semiconductors are important. The question is whether India can build this industry before rest of the world moves even further ahead. I hope you learned something new from this video. If you enjoy this kind of smart business and industry breakdown, make sure to subscribe and hype the video so that it reaches to more people. And you can watch this video next. I will see you in the next one. Till then, bye.